The squad car's red and blue lights painted the manicured lawns in violent strokes. As Karen Martinez stood triumphant on her porch, arms crossed, watching the officers approach the house next door. She'd finally done it, called the authorities on her nightmare neighbor. But as the lead officer walked past her toward the modest colonial, where Marcus Williams was calmly watering his roses, Karen had no idea she was about to discover the one thing that would shatter her perfect suburban world. The man she'd been tormenting for months wasn't just her neighbor. He was the most powerful person the morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estates as Marcus Williams stepped onto his front porch, coffee mug in hand. At 42, he maintained the disciplined posture of his military days, his dark skin gleaming with a thin sheen of sweat from his morning run. The neighborhood was pristine, every lawn meticulously maintained, every mailbox perfectly aligned, every house a testament to suburban order, except for the woman marching across the street toward him, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features into a permanent scowl. Marcus. Karen Martinez's voice cut through the morning stillness like a blade. We need to talk. Now, Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee, watching as his neighbor, if you could call someone who'd made his life hell for the past 8 months, a neighbor stomped up his driveway. Karen was 45, impeccably dressed even at 7 in the morning. Her designer workout clothes probably costing more than most people's monthly grocery budget. "Good morning, Karen," Marcus said evenly. "What can I do for you? Don't you?" "Good morning, me," she snapped, stopping at the bottom of his porch steps. "Your little project back there," she jabbed a manicured finger toward. "His backyard is going to stop today." Marcus set his mug on the porch railing. Through the gap between their houses, he could see the framework of the small deck he'd been building behind his garage. Every board cut to precise specifications, every joint carefully measured. It was going to be a place where he could sit in the evenings, maybe read a book, enjoy the quiet. "The deck is within all building codes and HOA regulations," Marcus said. "I filed the proper permits, and I don't care about your permits." Karen's voice rose to a shriek that sent a small dog barking 3 houses down. "It's blocking my view of the creek." Marcus glanced toward the thin strip of water that meandered behind the development. From Karen's kitchen window, you could barely make out a glimmer of it through the trees. His 8x10 deck wouldn't obstruct anything except maybe a few branches. "Karen, I understand you're concerned, but no, you don't understand." She stepped closer, her face flushing red. "Ever since you moved in here, it's been one thing after another. First, you painted your shutters, that awful blue color, navy blue. It's a standard color and well within HOA guidelines. Then, you planted those hideous flowers in front roses. They're roses, Karen. And now this monstrosity." She gestured wildly toward the half-built deck. "This is a respectable neighborhood, Marcus. We have standards here." The emphasis she put on his name made something cold settle in Marcus's stomach. He'd heard that tone before, in a dozen different places, from a dozen different people who thought they could make him feel small. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Marcus asked quietly. Karen's eyes narrowed. "I'm saying that some people don't understand how things work in a community like this. Some people think they can just move in and change everything to suit themselves." The morning air seemed to grow thicker. Across the street, Marcus noticed Mrs. Chen pretending to check her mailbox while obviously listening to every word. 2 houses down, Bob Fletcher had paused his lawn mowing and was watching the confrontation with unconcealed interest. "I see," Marcus said. "And what would you suggest I do about that? Tear it down. The deck. Tear it down and plant some nice normal shrubs, something that fits in." Karen's voice had taken on a wheedling tone, as if she were being reasonable. "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult here. I just want what's best for the neighborhood, for everyone." Marcus felt the familiar weight settling on his shoulders, the exhaustion that came from having this same conversation in different forms, in different places, with different people who all seemed to think they knew what was best for him. "The deck stays, Karen." Her face went from red to purple. "We'll see about that." She spun on her heel and marched back across the street, her footsteps sharp and angry on the asphalt. Marcus watched her disappear into her house, a pristine colonial with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. He'd moved to Willowbrook Estates hoping for exactly that kind of peace. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, and a decade working as a project manager for a construction company, he'd saved enough to buy a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. He wanted a place where he could breathe, where he could build things with his hands again, where he could just exist without having to prove he belonged. Instead, he'd gotten Karen Martinez. It had started small. Passive-aggressive comments about his garbage cans being 6 inches too far from the curb, complaints about his mailbox being the wrong shade of black, questions about whether he was really sure he understood the HOA rules and regulations. Then it escalated, formal complaints, filed with the HOA about his excessive Christmas decorations, 3 tasteful wreaths and some white lights. Anonymous reports to the city about suspicious activity at his address, which turned out to be Marcus working on his car in his own garage on a Saturday afternoon. A petition circulated to ban disruptive construction noise during family hours, targeted specifically at the 2 hours on weekend mornings when Marcus did minor home repairs. Each time, Marcus had responded with patience. He'd documented everything, followed every rule, dotted every I, and crossed every T. He'd been the model neighbor, even as Karen's harassment grew more blatant and more personal. But the deck was his line in the sand. Marcus finished his coffee and headed inside to shower before work. He was a project manager for Henderson Construction, overseeing the building of a new shopping complex downtown. It was good work, demanding, but good. It required precision, attention to detail, and the ability to manage multiple moving parts without losing sight of the bigger picture. Skills that were about to become very relevant to his home life. His phone buzzed as he was getting dressed. A text from his foreman, "Weather's perfect. Starting the foundation pour at 9 should be done by 3. Marcus smiled. After months of delays and permit issues, they were finally making real progress on the project. It felt good to build something from the ground up, to see concrete plans become concrete reality. Another buzz, this one from his next-door neighbor, Janet Stevens. An elderly widow who lived alone with 3 cats and a garden that belonged in Better Homes and Gardens, saw Karen stomping around this morning. "Everything okay?" Marcus texted back. "Just the usual. Nothing I can't handle. If you need anything, just holler." That woman needs to mind her own business. Janet was one of the good ones. She'd brought him homemade cookies when he first moved in, and had never once complained about anything he'd done to his property. When Marcus had offered to help her fix a loose section of her fence, she'd insisted on paying him for the materials and had invited him for dinner afterward. It was neighbors like Janet who reminded Marcus why he'd wanted to live here in the first place. He was backing out of his driveway when he saw Karen standing at her living room window, phone pressed to her ear, watching him with the intensity of a hawk studying a field mouse. Even from across the street, he could see her mouth, moving rapidly, her free hand gesturing animatedly. Marcus felt a familiar chill run down his spine. In his experience, when someone like Karen Martinez spent that much time on the phone while staring at him, it rarely ended well. But he had work to do, and a foundation poured to supervise, and a life to live that didn't revolve around his unstable neighbor's fixations. He had no way of knowing that by the time he returned home that evening, Karen would have made a decision that would change everything. The workday passed in a blur of concrete trucks and rebar inspections. The foundation pour went perfectly, and Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that came from watching skilled workers turn plans into reality. By the time he pulled into his driveway at 6:30, he was tired but content. That contentment lasted exactly as long as it took him to notice the police car parked across the street. 2 officers stood on Karen's front porch, one taking notes, while Karen gesticulated wildly, pointing repeatedly toward Marcus's house. Even from his driveway, he could hear fragments of her voice. ... Dangerous ... Threatening ... Afraid. For my safety, Marcus sat in his truck for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of resignation settle over him. He'd been through this before, in other places with other people who'd decided he was somehow a threat simply by existing in their space. The difference was that this time he wasn't going anywhere. He climbed out of his truck just as Karen pointed directly at him. Both officers turned to look, and Marcus saw something in their expressions that made his stomach tighten. Not hostility exactly, but a kind of professional wariness, that told him Karen had painted quite a picture. David Martinez knocked on Marcus's door exactly 20 minutes later, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled. His tie was loosened, his hair and there were deep lines of stress etched around his eyes that hadn't been there that morning. "Marcus," he said as the door opened. "Thank you for agreeing to talk." Marcus studied his neighbor's husband for a moment. David was 48, shorter than Marcus by several inches, with the soft build of a man who spent his days behind a desk. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour. "Come in," Marcus said, stepping aside. David followed him into the living room, his eyes taking in the space with obvious surprise. The house was immaculate, hardwood floors gleaming, furniture arranged with military precision, walls decorated with framed photographs from Marcus's time in Afghanistan, mixed with certificates and awards from his construction projects. "Nice place," David said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "Thank you. Can I get you something to drink?" "God, yes, whatever you have." Marcus returned from the kitchen with 2 beers, handing one to David, who took a long pull before setting the bottle on the coffee table. "I owe you an apology," David said without preamble. "Actually, I owe you about 100 apologies." "What?" "Karen's been doing Marcus." "I had no idea it was this bad." "You didn't know your wife was filing false police reports?" David's face flushed. "No. Jesus, no. I knew she was upset about some neighborhood stuff, but she told me you were being difficult about HOA regulations. She never mentioned police." Marcus sat back in his chair, studying David's face. "What exactly did she tell you? That you were ignoring community standards? Building things without permits? Making noise at all hours?" David ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I know Karen can be particular about the neighborhood. She takes a lot of pride in how things look, but filing false reports," he shook his head, "that's not just wrong, it's criminal. It's also not the first time she's lied about me to authorities." David's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Marcus got up and returned with a thick folder, setting it on the coffee table between them. 8 months of documentation. Every complaint your wife has filed, every investigation that's found them to be false, every instance of harassment. David opened the folder and began reading. With each page, his expression grew darker. Marcus watched as his neighbor's husband discovered the full scope of his wife's campaign against him. "The Christmas decoration complaint," David murmured, reading, "She told me you had lights that were visible from space. 3 wreaths and some white lights on the porch. The noise violation reports, ... David looked up. "She said you were using power tools at midnight, Saturday mornings between 9 and 11, well within permitted hours." David continued reading, his face growing paler with each document. "The petition about construction noise, she got 37 signatures, all from people who don't live anywhere near my house. Check the addresses." David flipped to the back of the petition, and his face went white. "These are all from other subdivisions. Some of them are from across town. Your wife has been conducting a systematic harassment campaign against me for 8 months. David, she's filed false reports with the city, the HOA, and now the police. She's distributed materials targeting me specifically, and she's done it, all while making it clear that she doesn't think I belong in this neighborhood." David closed the folder and sat back heavily. "Why? I think you know why." The 2 men stared at each other across the coffee table. David's face cycled through several expressions: denial, understanding, shame, and finally, a kind of exhausted resignation. "She's not a racist," he said quietly, "isn't she? I mean, I don't think she thinks of herself that way. She just ... David trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "She just thinks some people don't belong in neighborhoods like this." David's silence was answer enough. Marcus leaned forward. "David, I moved here because I wanted peace. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I work construction, I pay my taxes, follow the rules, and mind my own business. I've never done anything to your wife except exist in the same neighborhood. I know, God, Marcus, I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." David buried his face in his hands. "What can I do? How can I fix this?" "You can start by having a serious conversation with your wife about her behavior." "I will tonight, I promise." Marcus stood and walked to the window that looked out over the street. Karen's house sat dark and silent, but he could see the glow of lights from the back rooms. "There's something else you should know," Marcus said without turning around. "What?" "I've been elected HOA president." The silence behind him stretched so long that Marcus finally turned around. David was staring at him with an expression of complete shock. "You single quotes what? The election was 3 weeks ago? And Len?" "Ballots. The results were certified yesterday. I take office next Monday." David's beer bottle slipped from his fingers and crashed to the floor, sending glass and foam across the hardwood. He didn't seem to notice. "HOA president," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "That's right. But Karen said the HOA was completely behind her." "Did she?" "That's interesting, considering I received 68% of the vote." David stared at him for a long moment, then suddenly lurched to his feet and began pacing around the living room like a caged animal. "Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck." He spun around to face Marcus. "She doesn't know, does she? The official notification letters go out tomorrow. Jesus Christ." David sank back onto the couch. "Marcus, you have to understand, she's going to lose her mind. Completely lose it. She's been telling everyone for months that she's going to get you thrown out of the neighborhood." "I'm aware of that." "No, you don't understand. She's made it her mission, her obsession. She talks about it constantly. She's convinced herself that she's protecting the neighborhood from—" David trailed off again. "From what, David? From change. From people who don't fit her idea of what this place should be." Marcus walked back to his chair and sat down. "And what's going to happen when she finds out that not only am I not going anywhere, but I now have the authority to enforce the very HOA rules she's been misusing against me?" David's face went gray. "She fight it. She claimed the election was invalid. She'll try to get you removed." "On what grounds?" "I don't know, but she'll find something, or she'll think she will." David leaned forward, his expression desperate. "Marcus, I need you to understand something about my wife. She doesn't handle being wrong well, ever. And she really doesn't handle losing control." "What are you trying to tell me?" "I'm trying to tell you that when she finds out you're the new HOA president, she's going to escalate. Whatever she's done so far, it's going to get worse." Marcus considered this. In his experience, bullies typically back down when confronted with real consequences. But David knew his wife better than anyone. How much worse? I honestly don't know. But Marcus, ... David met his eyes. "Be careful, please. Karen doesn't just get angry. She gets vengeful." They were interrupted by a loud crash from across the street, followed by muffled shouting. Both men looked toward the window, where they could see lights blazing in Karen's house. "I should go," David said, standing, try to do some damage control. "David," he turned back, "your wife needs professional help. This level of obsession with a neighbor, the lying, the harassment, it's not normal behavior." David's shoulders sagged. "I know. I've been telling myself for months that it was just stress from her job, or hormones, or I don't know anything except what it actually is." "And what is it?" "My wife has spent her entire adult life believing that she gets to decide who belongs where, that she has some kind of authority over other people's lives." David paused at the door. "It's going to destroy her sense of reality." After David left, Marcus cleaned up the broken glass and settled into his chair with the HOA documentation he'd been reviewing for the past 3 weeks. As the newly elected president, he'd inherited a thick binder of ongoing issues, rule violations, and pending complaints. Karen's name appeared on 47 separate documents. She'd filed complaints against 12 different neighbors over the past 2 years. Noise violations, aesthetic infractions, parking issues, landscaping problems. Karen Martinez had made herself the unofficial enforcer of Willowbrook Estates, targeting anyone who didn't meet her standards. The previous HOA president, an elderly man named Frank Morrison, had apparently grown tired of dealing with her constant complaints and had rubber-stamped most of her requests without investigation. It was only when Marcus started getting targeted that other neighbors had begun coming forward with their own stories of Karen's harassment, which explained how Marcus had won the election with 68% of the vote. Marcus opened his laptop and began typing. As HOA president, one of his first responsibilities would be to review all pending complaints and ongoing issues. He had the authority to dismiss frivolous complaints, investigate legitimate concerns, and impose fines for rule violations. Starting tomorrow, every complaint Karen Martinez had filed over the past 2 years would be subject to review, and Marcus was V. Marcus's first official HOA meeting as president was scheduled for Thursday evening in the community center's main conference room. By 7 p.m., every seat was filled with additional residents standing along the walls. In his 3 weeks of preparation, Marcus had never seen this level of community engagement. Karen Martinez sat in the front row, flanked by 2 women Marcus recognized as her closest allies, Patricia Holbrook, a retired real estate agent who ran the neighborhood book club like a military operation, and Susan Wright, whose husband owned 3 car dealerships and who treated HOA meetings like corporate board sessions. The rest of the room buzzed with anticipation. Janet Stevens gave Marcus an encouraging nod from her seat near the back. The Johnsons, Chuns, and Wash, previous targets of Karen's complaints, sat together in what looked like a support group. David Martinez was notably absent. Marcus called the meeting to order and began with the standard administrative updates budget review, upcoming maintenance schedules, holiday decoration guidelines. Karen's foot tapped impatiently throughout, her eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. Now, Marcus said, consulting his notes, we come to the matter of outstanding complaints and violations. The room went dead silent. Over the past 2 years, this HOA has received 137 formal complaints from residents. Upon review, I've found that 47 of these complaints, more than 1/3, were filed by a single resident and subsequently found to be either false or grossly exaggerated. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's face had gone pale, but her jaw was set in a stubborn line. These false complaints have wasted countless hours of community time, created unnecessary conflict between neighbors, and violated Section 4.7 of our charter, which prohibits harassment of fellow residents. Karen shot to her feet. Point of order. You can't make unilateral determinations about the validity of complaints. Those complaints were filed in good faith to maintain community standards. Marcus consulted his folder. Mrs. Martinez, you filed 6 separate noise violation complaints against the Chen family. Each complaint alleged construction noise outside permitted hours. The city investigated all 6 complaints and found no violations. The Chuns provided time-stamped security footage showing no construction activity during the times you specified. How do you explain that? Karen's mouth opened and closed. The noise could have been from another source. You specifically stated in your complaint that you witnessed Mr. Chen using power tools on his roof at 11 p.m. on March 15th. Mr. Chen was in the hospital having surgery that day. He has medical records proving it. The crowd stirred, several people whispering to each other. Karen looked around desperately as if seeking support, but found only curious and increasingly hostile faces. You filed for complaints about the Johnson family's mailbox being non-regulation black, Marcus continued. The HOA charter specifies that mailboxes must be dark-colored. Black is specifically listed as an acceptable color. It was the wrong shade of black, Karen protested. According to whom? There's no specification about shades in the regulations. It's common sense. Anyone can see that. Mrs. Martinez, Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Common sense is not enforceable under HOA regulations. Only written rules are. Patricia Holbrook leaned forward. Marcus, while we appreciate your ... thoroughness ... perhaps we could move on to other business. Actually, Patricia, I think this is very much community business, because according to my review, you've also filed 17 complaints over the past 2 years. Would you like me to discuss those as well? Patricia's face flushed red, and she sank back into her seat. Marcus turned to address the full room. For too long, this community has operated under the assumption that some residents have the authority to interpret and enforce rules based on their personal preferences rather than the actual written regulations that ends. Now here, called out Mr. Chen from the middle of the room. Furthermore, Marcus continued, I'm implementing a new complaint review process. All future complaints must include photographic evidence, specific rule citations, and witness statements. Complaints found to be false or frivolous will result in mandatory fines. Karen lunged to her feet again. You can't fine people for filing complaints. That's intimidation. I can fine people for harassment, which is what persistent false complaints constitute. Marcus pulled out a thick folder. Which brings me to the formal violations I'm issuing tonight. The room went completely silent. Karen Martinez, you are hereby fined $500 for violations of Section 4.7. Persistent harassment of neighbors. You have 30 days to pay or a lien will be placed on your property. Karen's face went white, then red, then purple. This is outrageous. I demand a hearing. You're welcome to appeal to the County HOA Oversight Board. The process is outlined in your violation notice. Marcus handed her an official document. Patricia Holbrook, you are fined $300 for the same violation. Patricia gasped audibly. I have never harassed anyone. You filed a complaint claiming the Williams family's garden gnome violated aesthetic standards. There is no regulation prohibiting garden gnomes. You filed another complaint about their sprinkler system running during inappropriate hours. The system runs at 5 a.m., which is specifically listed as a permitted time for irrigation. But garden gnomes are tacky. Tacky is not a violation of HOA rules. Marcus continued down his list, issuing fines to 5 more residents for frivolous complaints. With each name called, the room grew more tense and the targets more indignant. This is a witch hunt, Karen shrieked when he finished. You're abusing your power. I'm enforcing the rules as written, Karen. The same rules you've been claiming. To protect for 2 years, those people, she gestured wildly at the Chens, Johnsons, and other previous targets. They don't understand how to maintain a quality neighborhood. Someone has to enforce standards. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus felt the entire room shift, the subtle undercurrent of support for Karen evaporating in real time. What exactly do you mean by those people, Karen? Asked Janet Stevens from the back of the room. Karen spun around to face her. I mean people who don't take pride in their property. People who think they can just do whatever they want without consideration for their neighbors. Like what, Priest Mr. Johnson? Like painting our mailbox black. Like having a garden gnome. Like watering our lawn at 5 in the morning. Like not understanding the standards this community was built on. And what standards are those? Marcus asked quietly. Karen turned back to him, her eyes blazing. Standards of excellence, of quality, of maintaining property values and community cohesion. Standards that ensure the right kind of people live here. The silence that followed was deafening. Several residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared at Karen with open shock. The right kind of people, Marcus repeated. Yes, people who respect the community they live in. People like you. People who understand how things should be done. Marcus nodded slowly. I see. And people like me don't understand how things should be done. Karen's mouth snapped shut as she seemed to realize the trap she'd walked into. But it was too late. Her meaning was crystal clear to everyone in the room. What I mean is, ... double quotes, she stammered. What you mean is perfectly clear, Karen. Marcus stood up from the head table. You've spent 2 years trying to drive out neighbors who don't meet your personal definition of acceptable. You've filed false complaints, harassed families, and wasted community resources because you believe you have the authority to determine who belongs in this neighborhood. That's not you called the police on me yesterday and filed a false report because I wouldn't tear down a legal structure on my own property. You've spent 8 months trying to force me out of a home I own, pay taxes on, and have every right to live in. Karen looked around the room frantically, but found no support. Even Patricia and Susan were staring at her with expressions of dawning horror. But Marcus, Patricia said weakly, surely you understand that maintaining standards, Patricia. The standards are written down in the HOA charter. They apply equally to everyone. There are no different standards for different types of people. Of course not. But what? Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before she finally looked down at her hands. Marcus surveyed the room. Let me be very clear about how this HOA will operate going forward. The rules apply to everyone equally. Complaints must be based on actual violations of written regulations, not personal preferences. And harassment of any resident for any reason will result in immediate fines and potential legal action. You can't just change everything, Karen shouted. This community has traditions. It has a certain character. The only tradition that matters is following the actual rules. Karen and the character of this community should be defined by how we treat each other, not by who we try to exclude. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her face cycling through rage, disbelief, and something that looked like genuine panic. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit. "This isn't over," she called over her shoulder. "I'll fight this. I'll appeal everything. I'll prove that you're destroying this neighborhood." The door slammed behind her with enough force. 3 days after the mailbox incident, Marcus arrived home from work to find a certified letter waiting in his temporary post office box. The return address made his blood run cold. Blackstone and Associates, attorneys at law. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter alleging that Marcus was abusing his position as HOA president to target and harass longtime community members, and demanding that he immediately rescind all fines and violations issued in bad faith. The letter was signed by Amanda Blackstone, ESQ, and CCD to the County HOA Oversight Board, the City Attorney's Office, and the local newspaper. Marcus read the letter twice, then called David Martinez. "Your wife hired a lawyer." "I know. She did it without telling me." "Marcus, I'm sorry, but David, she's escalating this to a legal battle." "Are you prepared for where that leads?" "What do you mean?" "I mean discovery, depositions. Everything becomes public record. Every complaint she's filed, every false statement she's made, every instance of harassment over the past 2 years. It all comes out." Silence on the other end. "David, she thinks she can win. She thinks if she can prove you're abusing your power, she can get you removed and elect someone who will see things her way, someone who will rubber stamp her harassment of neighbors she doesn't approve of." Yes, Marcus walked to his window and looked across the street. Karen's house was dark, except for the glow of her home office, where she'd been working late every night since the HOA meeting. What's she planning? I don't know exactly, but she's been making calls, lots of calls, to city councilors, county commissioners, the mayor's office. She's telling everyone who will listen that you're unfit for office. On what grounds? That you're biased against longtime residents, that you're trying to change the character of the neighborhood. David's voice dropped to a whisper. That you're an outsider who doesn't understand community values. Marcus felt the familiar cold anger settling in his chest. "I see, Marcus. She's building a narrative. She's very good at it. She's got Patricia and Susan backing her up, and they're reaching out to everyone they know in local government. Let her try. You don't understand. These people know each other. They go to the same church, the same country club, the same charity events. Karen's been part of this community's social circle for 15 years. She has connections, and I have documentation." Marcus spent that evening compiling everything he'd gathered over the past 8 months. Security footage, complaint records, witness statements, police reports, city investigation results. By midnight, he had assembled a comprehensive case file that painted a clear picture of systematic harassment. But as he worked, his phone kept buzzing with text messages from neighbors. "Janet Stevens, someone called the city about your deck. Inspector is coming tomorrow. Mr. Chen got a visit from code enforcement today. They wanted to check our garden gnome for permit compliance. A garden gnome, Mrs. Johnson, animal control, showed up asking about our dogs barking. We don't have a dog." Marcus set down his phone and stared at the screen. Karen wasn't just fighting him anymore. She was weaponizing the entire city bureaucracy against anyone who had supported him at the HOA meeting. The next morning brought more evidence of Karen's campaign. Marcus found flyers under his windshield wipers and scattered around the neighborhood. Concerned citizens meeting Thursday, 7 p.m. Community center topic. Protecting Willowbrook Estates from divisive leadership. All concerned residents welcome. The flyer was professionally printed and carefully worded to avoid anything actionable. But the message was clear. Karen was organizing Marcus called the community center to confirm that Karen had indeed reserved the space, claiming she needed to discuss community safety concerns. As HOA president, he could have blocked the reservation, but that would only fuel her narrative that he was suppressing opposition. Instead, he decided to attend Thursday evening. Marcus arrived at the community center to find the parking lot fuller than it had been for his own HOA meeting. Through the windows, he could see Karen at the front of the room, addressing a crowd, with Patricia and Susan flanking her like bodyguards. Marcus slipped in through the back door and took a seat in the last row, pulling up the hood of his jacket. Most of the audience consisted of people he didn't recognize, presumably the connections David had mentioned, but scattered throughout were familiar faces from the neighborhood, some looking skeptical, others nodding along with Karen's presentation. Pattern of intimidation and abuse of power, Karen was saying, consulting notes on a podium. In his first week as president, he's issued over $2,000 in fines to longtime residents who were simply trying to maintain community standards. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. He's targeted respected members of our community with baseless harassment charges, while ignoring actual violations from his supporters. He's created a hostile environment where good families are afraid to voice concerns about their own neighborhood. Patricia Holbrook stood up. I've lived here for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like this. We had a beautiful, peaceful community before this man decided he could impose his will on all of us. What kind of violations is he ignoring? Called out someone from the middle of the room. Karen smiled. I'm glad you asked. There are currently 17 open violations that the previous administration documented but that our new president has chosen not to enforce. She began reading from a list. Unauthorized parking in driveways, landscaping that doesn't meet aesthetic standards, holiday decorations displayed outside permitted timeframes, noise violations during family hours. Marcus pulled out his phone and began recording. Every violation Karen was describing was either completely fabricated or a gross misrepresentation of normal homeowner behavior. Furthermore, Karen continued, we have evidence that this man has used his position to retaliate against residents who opposed his election. Just this week, supporters of his have filed nuisance complaints against longtime community members, clearly coordinated through his office. The crowd was getting worked up now, several people talking angrily among themselves. What we're dealing with here, Karen said, her voice rising, is not just poor leadership, it's a fundamental attack on the values that make this community special. This man doesn't understand what we've built here. He doesn't respect the traditions that have kept property values high and families safe. What traditions? Called out a voice Marcus recognized as Mr. Chen. Karen's face flushed. The tradition of neighbors looking out for each other, of maintaining standards that ensure this remains the kind of place where good families want to live. And what kind of families are those? Mr. Chen pressed. Families who take pride in their homes, who understand that living in a community like this comes with responsibilities. Marcus stood up and lowered his hood. Responsibilities like following the actual HOA rules instead of making up your own. The room erupted. Half the crowd turned to stare at Marcus, while Karen's face went white with shock and rage. You! She pointed at him with a shaking finger. You have no right to be here. This meeting is for concerned residents. I am a resident, Karen, and according to the community center rental agreement, this is a public meeting. Marcus walked down the center aisle as conversations exploded around him. Several people were arguing loudly, while others pulled out phones to record the confrontation. You want to talk about abuse of power, Marcus said, reaching the front of the room. Let's talk about the 17 complaints you claim I'm ignoring. He pulled out his phone and connected it to the room's presentation system. Let's start with unauthorized parking in driveways. Karen, can you explain how parking in your own driveway violates any HOA rule? Karen's mouth opened and closed. It's about the type of vehicles, the type of vehicles. You mean like Mr. Rodriguez's pickup truck, the one he uses for his landscaping business, the business that's been servicing this neighborhood for 8 years. Murmurs from the crowd, some supportive, others hostile. Marcus pulled up the next item. Landscaping that doesn't meet aesthetic standards. You filed a complaint about the Williams family's vegetable garden. Can you point me to the HOA rule that prohibits growing tomatoes? It's not about tomatoes, Karen snapped. It's about maintaining a certain appearance whose appearance standards yours, because they're not in the HOA charter. Marcus clicked to the next slide. Holiday decorations displayed outside permitted timeframes. This was a complaint about the Nakamura family, leaving their Christmas lights up until January 15th. Karen, what's the official HOA deadline for removing Christmas decorations? Silence. The deadline is February 1st. Karen, the Nakamuras were 3 weeks early, not late. The crowd was getting restless now, people arguing with each other as they realized the scope of Karen's deception. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, addressing the full room, "every complaint Mrs. Martinez is asking me to enforce is either completely fabricated or a misrepresentation of normal homeowner behavior. She's not asking me to maintain standards, she's asking me to harass her neighbors." "That's a lie," Karen shrieked. "You're twisting everything. These people don't understand. Don't understand what Karen, they don't understand hope."